The Gilded Oak doesn't advertise. It doesn't need to. Manhattan's wealthiest already know its address, already know its silence, already know that the only sound louder than the clink of bone china is the quiet confidence of money that has never had to prove itself. It was a Tuesday evening when Richard Calloway walked in, with 6 board members trailing behind him like satellites orbiting a cold, indifferent sun. And it was that same evening when he looked across the white linen at a woman named Ava Monroe, her posture straight, her eyes steady, her name tag slightly worn, and decided she was nothing. He leaned back, swirled his wine, and spoke in a rapid, aristocratic Spanish dialect he was certain she could not understand. «Mire esta pobrecita. Parece que no tiene un céntimo. Tráenos lo de siempre y vuelve a desaparecer». What Richard Calloway didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman holding the notepad had once sat across from foreign diplomats in rooms far grander than this, and the language he had just tried to weaponize, it was her native battlefield. You are about to witness one of the most satisfying comebacks ever told. A woman they called invisible, a man who thought he owned every room. Before we continue, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next will leave you speechless. I used to walk into rooms where nations were decided. I used to sit in leather chairs that smelled like old wood and older power. And I used to translate the fate of thousands into sentences so precise that a single misplaced word could unravel a treaty. That was before my mother got sick. That was before the hospital bills arrived in envelopes so thick they looked like invitations to a party no one wanted to attend. Manhattan doesn't care about your resume when the rent is due. The Gilded Oak hired me on a Thursday. I wore a pressed blouse, kept my hair pulled back, and smiled the way they teach you to smile when you are invisible. Soft, agreeable, forgettable. The manager, a thin man named Gerald, told me the rules. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't linger. Don't let them see you think. I nodded. I had been swallowing my own brilliance for months now, and it had become almost comfortable, like holding your breath underwater and pretending you didn't need air. Every shift, I carried a tray, and I carried silence, and I told myself it was temporary. But silence, once it becomes a habit, starts to feel like home. Richard Calloway entered the Gilded Oak the way a storm enters a quiet village, not with an announcement, but with a shift in the air. The temperature in the room didn't change, but something did. Every server straightened. Every busboy moved faster. Gerald appeared at the door like a man greeting a god he both feared and needed. Richard didn't nod. He simply walked, and 6 men in tailored suits followed him to the largest table in the house, the one by the window, the one that overlooked the city like a throne overlooking a kingdom. I was assigned to his table. Of course I was. Gerald pointed with his chin, a small, silent gesture that meant, handle this carefully. I approached with my notepad, my back straight, my expression neutral. Richard didn't look at me, not once. He spoke to his board members, laughed at something that wasn't funny, and waved his hand in my direction the way you'd wave at a fly. I stood there, 3 feet from a man worth $12 billion, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter, a slow, burning recognition that I had been reduced to furniture, and somewhere, deep inside me, a door I had locked was beginning to creak open. He wanted to show off. That was the thing about men like Richard Calloway. Their cruelty was never private. It was always performed, always an audience sport. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and turned to his board members with that smile, the one that said, "Watch this." «Mira esta pobrecita. Parece que no tiene un céntimo. Tráenos lo de siempre y vuelve a desaparecer. No necesitamos que piense, solo que sirva. Look at this poor thing. She looks like she doesn't have a dime. Bring us the usual and go disappear. We don't need her to think, just to serve." His colleagues chuckled, a low, approving sound, the kind of laugh that says, we are all in on this joke. Richard's eyes flickered to me for just a moment, not to see if I understood, but to confirm that I didn't. He was so certain, so utterly, arrogantly certain that the woman in the pressed apron could not possibly speak the language he had just used to strip her of her dignity. And I stood there, notepad in hand, and I let him have that certainty for exactly 4 seconds. Because here is what Richard Calloway did not know. I had spent 11 years translating Castilian Spanish at the highest diplomatic levels. I had corrected world leaders mid-sentence, and every single word he had just spoken, every syllable, had landed on me with the precision of a bullet, and I had felt every one. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply set the notepad down on the edge of the table, slowly, deliberately, and I looked Richard Calloway directly in the eyes for the first time that evening. The table went quiet. Not the polite quiet of a pause between courses, the suffocating quiet of a room that knows something is about to change. Ava Monroe. Con todo el respeto, señor Calloway, lo que acaba de pedir no tiene sentido estratégico. Su propuesta de adquisición tiene un error fundamental. Está usando valor de mercado cuando debería estar hablando de valor neto ajustado. Sus propios directivos lo saben. Y en cuanto a lo de pobrecita, prefiero que me llame señorita Monroe. With all due respect, Mr. Calloway, what you just ordered doesn't make strategic sense. Your acquisition proposal has a fundamental error. You're using market value when you should be discussing adjusted net worth. Your own directors know this, and as for pobrecita, I'd prefer you call me Ms. Monroe. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was devastating. Richard's wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. One of his board members, a woman named Patricia Hale, sharp-eyed and razor-tongued, let out a breath she had clearly been holding. I watched Richard's face move through 5 expressions in 3 seconds. Shock, confusion, fury, humiliation, and then the most dangerous one, calculation. But the damage was already done. I had spoken, and the room had heard me, and in that moment, the woman he had tried to erase had become the only person in the room anyone would remember. Richard Calloway was not a man who lost gracefully. He had built an empire on the principle that no one, not a rival, not a regulator, not a waitress, could ever have the last word. So he did what powerful men do when their power is challenged in public. He reached for the one weapon he still believed was unbeatable, his wallet. He snapped his fingers, actually snapped them, and Gerald materialized at the table like smoke given a body. Richard didn't look at me when he spoke. He looked at Gerald, and his voice was ice. Esta mujer es una falta de respeto. La quiero fuera de aquí en 2 minutos, o este restaurante pierde la cuenta de mi empresa. ¿Me entendiste? This woman is disrespectful. I want her out of here in 2 minutes, or this restaurant loses my company's account. Did I make myself clear? Gerald's face went white. I watched him look at me, really look at me, for the first time since I'd started working there, and I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not courage exactly, something closer to guilt. He opened his mouth. I held up my hand. I didn't need Gerald to fight this battle. I didn't need anyone. Because at that exact moment, a voice from the next table, calm, unhurried, and carrying the quiet authority of someone who had nothing to prove, said, "Gerald, sit down. No one is going anywhere." His name was Eli Voss. I didn't know him then, not by face, not by reputation, but Richard Calloway knew him. Everyone in that room knew him. Eli Voss was the CEO of one of the largest technology companies on the planet, a man who had built his fortune not through inheritance or aggression, but through a quiet, relentless intelligence that made people underestimate him until it was far too late. He had been sitting at the next table for the entire evening, alone, watching. He stood, not quickly, not dramatically. He simply rose, buttoned his jacket, and turned to Richard's table with an expression that was almost gentle. Almost. Ella tiene razón, Richard. El término correcto es valor neto ajustado. Todos en esta mesa lo saben, y tú lo sabes también. Lo que no sabías es que la mujer que estabas tratando como mobiliario es probablemente la persona más calificada en este edificio para explicarte por qué. She's right, Richard. The correct term is adjusted net worth. Everyone at this table knows it, and so do you. What you didn't know is that the woman you were treating like furniture is probably the most qualified person in this building to explain to you why. Richard's jaw tightened. He looked from Eli to me, then back to Eli, and for the first time that evening, I saw something I had never expected to see on the face of a man worth $12 billion. Richard Calloway looked small. The room didn't applaud. This wasn't that kind of place. But the silence spoke louder than any applause ever could. The fallout was not loud. It was surgical. Within 48 hours, 2 of Richard's board members, Patricia Hale and a man named James Whitford, quietly reached out to Eli Voss's team. Not about a deal, about distance. They wanted it known, in the way that powerful people communicate these things without ever saying them directly, that Richard Calloway's leadership style had become a liability. The acquisition he had been celebrating, it stalled. Not because of numbers, because of optics. Because in a single evening, Richard had revealed something that no boardroom presentation ever could. That beneath the empire, there was a man who needed to make others feel small in order to feel large. As for me, Eli called 2 days later, not to offer me a favor, to offer me a role. Senior linguistic strategist for his global operations division. The salary alone would cover my mother's care for years. I sat in my small apartment, phone in hand, and I cried. Not from sadness, but from the relief of being seen. For the first time in a very long time, someone had looked at me and seen not the apron, not the name tag, but the woman underneath. The one who had always been there, waiting. My mother cried when I told her. Not because of the job, though that mattered, God knows it mattered. She cried because I told her the truth about what had happened at the Gilded Oak. I told her about Richard, about his Spanish, about the way he had looked through me like I was glass. And then I told her what I had said back. She grabbed my hand, squeezed it with the strength she had left, and she said something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Mija, they can take your job, they can take your time, but they can never take what's inside your mind. That belongs only to you. Mija, pueden quitarte el trabajo, pueden quitar tu tiempo, pero lo que tienes en la mente, eso nunca lo pueden quitar. Eso solo te pertenece a ti. My daughter, they can take your job, they can take your time, but what you have in your mind, that can never be taken. That belongs only to you. I started at Eli's company on a Monday morning. Corner office, floor-to-ceiling windows, no name tag. I thought about Richard Calloway once, just once, on my first day. I thought about the way he had looked at me in that restaurant, certain that I was nothing. And I smiled, not out of bitterness, not even out of triumph. I smiled because I finally understood something that had taken me years to learn. The people who try to make you invisible are not seeing something empty. They are seeing something they are afraid of. And the greatest revenge, the only one that ever truly lasts, is simply refusing to disappear.
Thank you for watching. This is Beyond the Scripted. Please subscribe, like, and share for more interesting stories.